1. The invisible killer beneath you. On a winter battlefield, the night can look deceptively peaceful. No howling wind, no blizzard, no gunfire, and yet, people still die. I want you to picture this in the first moments. A soldier lies down after a brutal day, wrapped tightly inside a thick blanket. His breath fogs softly in the cold air. He believes he has done everything right. He believes he is safe. But beneath his body, under the layers he never thought about, something is silently draining the life out of him. Bullets kill quickly, but there is something far more patient, far more silent, and far more merciless. It doesn't strike from above or ahead, it rises from below. It is the frozen earth itself, pulling warmth out of the human body with no hesitation, no warning, and no sound. Most cold-weather deaths didn't happen during storms or marches, they happened at rest. They happened when people finally let their guard down, they added more blankets, they tightened their coats. They curled into their sleeping bags. And yet they forgot the one threat that lay directly under them, the ground that steals heat with perfect efficiency. Across eras and across civilizations, humans have repeated this one deadly mistake. We defend ourselves from the cold air pressing down on us, but forget the cold soil pulling heat out from beneath us. During the Cold War, soldiers were taught a rule so important that it appeared in almost every survival instruction. Before unrolling a sleeping bag, before arranging blankets, before even considering rest, one item had to be placed down first, and it wasn't the sleeping bag, it wasn't the blanket. The men who ignored this step often didn't wake up. So what was this tool that mattered more than any blanket? Why did ancient cultures know its importance long before modern science could explain it? And why does overlooking it remain one of the most dangerous mistakes a human can make today? Stay with me, because the truth goes much deeper than you think. And it begins long before modern warfare, long before technology, and long before the word insulation even existed. 2. How ancient people survived winters before science. Long before humans understood thermal conduction or insulation, long before physics became a discipline, our ancestors had already discovered one of the most powerful survival principles ever learned. They didn't write it down. They didn't calculate it. They simply lived long enough to pass it forward. That principle was simple: never let your body lie directly on the winter earth. Early hunter-gatherers slept not on the ground, but on thick layers of animal hides, bundled grass, dry leaves, or stacked branches. These were not comforts. They were shields, practical, reliable barriers that trapped precious pockets of air beneath the body. Fire might dim during the night, winds might turn against them, but the layer beneath them was the difference between waking up and never waking at all. As human societies grew, their homes reflected the same understanding. In Siberian huts, Scandinavian log houses, Mongolian gers, and early American frontier cabins, people raised their sleeping platforms high above the soil. They built wooden floors, spread straw under bedding, and kept their bodies far away from the cold earth. In every culture across the northern world, the same pattern appears again and again. Not a single thriving winter culture slept willingly on bare ground. Because they didn't need a scientific formula to understand its danger, experience taught them everything. The earth beneath a sleeping human is not neutral. It is a massive reservoir of cold, always ready to pull heat away from the body. People who survived enough winters didn't need to understand the term conduction. They knew the law behind it. They knew that the ground does not chill you, it drains you. And as centuries passed, armies learned the same lesson under even harsher conditions. From Roman scouts to medieval foot soldiers to early modern explorers, veterans warned new recruits about a danger far greater than snow or wind. Never, under any circumstance, sleep directly on the ground. Carry hides, carry mats, carry branches, carry anything that keeps your body lifted away. Fire could flicker, weather could shift, but the enemy beneath you never stopped working. Ancient people may not have understood the physics, yet they understood the principle more deeply than many modern campers and hikers do. The cold earth does not care about your strength, your clothing, or your blanket. It only obeys one law: it will keep pulling heat until your body has none left to give. And that is why, for thousands of years, humans placed layers beneath their bodies, not for comfort, but for survival. They learned through generations of hardship that the ground can steal your warmth more efficiently than the wind ever could. 3. Cold air is not the real enemy. We often imagine cold air as the greatest threat of winter, the icy wind that bites at our skin and steals warmth from our breath. But the twist is this: the cold air is not what kills the fastest. The real enemy is conduction. It is the heat that leaves your body the moment it touches the ground beneath you. If you want proof, you don't need a battlefield. You only need a floor. Lie down on a cold tile in your own home. Then stand up and lie on a carpet at the exact same room temperature. Your skin already knows what science later confirmed. Air cools you slowly. Solid ground cools you relentlessly. There are 3 main ways the human body loses heat: convection through wind, radiation through the open air, and conduction, the direct transfer of heat from your warm body into the colder object beneath you. The reason conduction is the deadliest during sleep is because you are in constant, unbroken contact for hours. The ground beneath you is a massive reservoir of cold. Your body is a tiny reservoir of warmth, and one always empties into the other. Modern survival manuals talk endlessly about layers, jackets, down insulation, or sleeping bags. Yet the original video reminds us of a brutal truth that militaries learned through experience. A soldier can climb into the warmest down-filled sleeping bag ever made, but if he lies directly on frozen earth without a proper barrier, his core temperature can still fall before morning. It is why Cold War doctrine repeated the same command again and again. Lay down the mat first. Always the mat first. Only then the sleeping bag, only then the blankets, only then the gear. This was not superstition, it was physics applied with absolute clarity. Consider something even more revealing. A wet wool blanket, once praised as a soldier's lifeline, becomes a heat sink the moment moisture enters it. Instead of protecting you, it begins to pull warmth away from your body. But a closed-cell foam mat, the kind issued during the Cold War, does not absorb water, does not collapse under weight, and keeps insulating even when the foam itself freezes solid. In other words, the mat continues to function long after blankets fail. And yet, the most terrifying part is how quietly the danger works. Your body does not scream when conduction starts winning. It does not send sharp pain or urgent alarms. Instead, you simply feel tired, heavier, sleepier, more comfortable than you should. That is the trap. By the time your brain realizes what is happening, your core may already be falling. And that is why understanding conduction isn't just scientific trivia. It is survival. Stay with me, because what happens next inside the human body is far darker than most people imagine. 4. How the body actually dies from cold. When you think you're safe, most people imagine death by cold as a dramatic struggle, shivering violently in the snow or gasping for breath in a blizzard. But in reality, many people who succumb to the cold do not die in terror. They die in a feeling of calm, heavy drowsiness. They simply drift away. The reason is found in the way the body loses heat through its pressure points. The original Cold War accounts emphasized this with absolute certainty. The hips, the shoulders, and the torso are the 3 regions where heat disappears the fastest. It isn't folklore, it isn't a camping tip, it is physics, applied methodically to human anatomy. These areas bear the greatest weight when you lie down. The pressure squeezes out the tiny pockets of warm air that normally cushion your body. Without those air pockets, your insulation collapses. Your body makes direct, unprotected contact with the ground's cold mass, and conduction begins its silent work. This is why so many people fall for the same deadly mistake. When they feel cold at night, they pull their blanket higher, they close their jacket tighter, they add more layers on top. But layering the top of your body does nothing to stop the heat pouring downward into the earth. They seal the roof while the foundation is collapsing. Survival instructors, especially those shaped by Cold War doctrine, taught a far more practical law. Protect the core, the central column of organs that keep you alive, from the ground first. If your core temperature begins to fall, no amount of blankets over your chest or shoulders can reverse it. Once the heat leaves the core, the rest of the body cannot compensate. This is also why the sleeping mat was never considered a comfort item. It was treated as a shield. Soldiers did not carry it for softness. They carried it to avoid the one mistake they could not afford to make: lying down unprotected. Your body loses heat quietly, your breath slows. Your limbs stiffen, your thoughts blur. You feel calm, even peaceful, as the earth pulls just a bit more warmth from you with each passing minute. Cold has no roar and no scream. It kills by gently convincing you that everything is fine. And that is the cruel genius of hypothermia. It does not frighten you, it lulls you, which is exactly why militaries across the coldest regions in history placed such obsessive importance on the ground barrier beneath a sleeping soldier. Because that thin mat was not comfort, it was life. 5. The silent deaths that happened without a single shot fired. There is a kind of tragedy in winter warfare that rarely appears in history books. It does not involve explosions or ambushes. It does not leave scorch marks on the snow or broken branches on frozen trees. It is the kind of tragedy that unfolds slowly, quietly, inside the walls of a tent. Imagine a small border outpost, a place forgotten by the world, where a handful of soldiers spend the night after a long frozen patrol. They have blankets, they have sleeping bags. They even have a fire smoldering outside. By every ordinary measure, they seem prepared. But the ground beneath them is soaked from melting frost. Cold moisture creeps upward through the soil. The tent floor is thin. And someone, maybe from exhaustion, maybe from rushing, forgot to bring the sleeping mats inside. Or perhaps the mats were left leaning outside to dry and never retrieved. Or maybe a few were soaked, stiff, or used improperly. To a tired soldier, this seems like a small mistake. After all, he has a thick sleeping bag. He has a heavy wool blanket. Surely that is enough. But as veterans have said again and again, forgetting the sleeping mat is more dangerous than forgetting the sleeping bag itself. Because a sleeping bag without a ground barrier is little more than a fabric shell. Once weight compresses the insulation under your body, the loft disappears, the warmth disappears, and the cold earth begins its work. This isn't speculation, this is physics. This is what decades of Cold War survival research proved repeatedly. A mat was light, cheap, and nearly indestructible. You could tear it, bend it, scorch it, or freeze it, and it would still function. But a sleeping bag could fail the moment moisture got inside. A blanket could become a heat sink the moment it absorbed water. Loft could collapse. Zippers could jam, fabric could tear. Dampness could render it almost useless. But the mat kept working. Now imagine the hours passing inside that dimly lit tent. The fire outside burns low. Condensation forms on the canvas walls. A soldier shifts in his sleep, unknowingly pressing his torso harder against the frozen ground. Another curls tighter into his blanket, unaware that the cold underneath is pulling heat away faster than his body can replace it. No one screams, no one calls for help. Hypothermia rarely gives you a moment of drama, it simply lulls you deeper into sleep. You feel warmer than you should. You feel softer, heavier, and then, slowly, the body begins to shut down. When dawn finally arrives, the camp is bathed in a pale blue light. Steam rises from the frosted soil. The patrol commander steps into the tent and sees shapes beneath blankets, still and quiet, as if everyone is still asleep. But one of them doesn't wake up, and then another, and one more. No enemy attacked them, no bullet struck them, nothing pierced the canvas of the tent. They simply never rose again. This is why Cold War manuals were so blunt. This is why instructors hammered the doctrine into recruits: prepare your bed from the ground up. Protect the body from below first. Because in winter warfare, the cold doesn't need a weapon, the earth itself is a weapon. And many soldiers learned that lesson too late. 6th, the survival myths that make modern people dangerous. In today's world, surrounded by glossy advertisements and survival gear catalogues, it is easy to believe that technology has outsmarted nature. But winter does not negotiate with branding. Cold does not care about marketing. And survival has never depended on style, it has always depended on physics. There are 4 myths that continue to mislead people today, and each one can be deadly. The first myth is the belief that a high-end sleeping bag is enough. Modern buyers look at temperature ratings, fill power and insulation types, convinced that the right design will keep them safe in any condition. But the truth, as demonstrated repeatedly in Cold War training and reinforced in the original video, is simple. Even the warmest sleeping bag becomes nearly useless without ground insulation. When the insulation under your body is compressed, all the warmth you paid for escapes downward into the soil. The second myth is the idea that adding another blanket solves everything. People pile more layers on top of themselves, unaware that a blanket once damp can become a heat sink. Moisture transforms wool or fabric into a cold sponge, pulling warmth away faster than the air ever could. Adding more weight on top increases compression below, making conduction even worse. The third myth, surprisingly common even among outdoors enthusiasts, is the belief that moisture barriers should be placed underneath the insulating layer. But as Cold War manuals stated clearly, moisture barriers go above insulation, not below. Placing the barrier underneath traps moisture against the mat or bedding, causing condensation and accelerating heat loss. When placed correctly above the insulating layer, the barrier keeps the insulation dry, warm, and functional. And finally, the fourth myth is perhaps the most modern of all: the belief that brand, prestige, or price determines survival. People assume that an expensive jacket or elite outdoor gear guarantees safety. But luxury has never mattered to the cold, only physics has. A simple closed-cell foam mat, costing a fraction of what premium gear costs today, often performs better than items 10 times its price. Function is what keeps you alive. Not labels, not colors, not trends. This is the uncomfortable truth many people overlook. Survival is not glamorous. It is not fashionable. It is not measured by the sophistication of the tools you carry. It is measured by whether those tools obey the laws of heat, moisture, pressure, and time. And when it comes to winter survival, especially at night, the most reliable tool has always been the simplest: the barrier between your body and the earth. Because in the end, myths may comfort you, but physics is what keeps you alive. 7. What America must remember today. You don't need fancy gear, you need the right principle. Across the United States, every winter brings scenes that look nothing like a battlefield, yet hide the same quiet danger. Houses fall dark during ice storms. Power lines collapse under the weight of freezing rain. Families gather around candles and flashlights, believing that thick blankets and warm coats will be enough to see them through the night. But the truth is far less comforting. In moments like these, it isn't the cold air inside the house that becomes the greatest threat. It is the floor beneath your feet, the concrete slab in the basement, the tile in the kitchen, the damp ground in a garage, or the frozen soil beneath a tent pitched hastily in the backyard. In America today, people still underestimate the same enemy that killed soldiers in the night. They pile more layers on top, unaware that the cold below is moving steadily upward. And in the silence of a powerless winter night, it is the floor, not the wind, that can pull the warmth from a sleeping body. This is where the lessons of history become intensely practical. If you ever face a blackout in midwinter, if your home loses heat, or if you find yourself stranded outdoors, you do not need a catalogue of high-end gear to survive. You do not need the most expensive sleeping bag or the newest insulated jacket. What you need is the same principle ancient people trusted and Cold War soldiers depended on. Protect the body from the ground first. If you do not have a proper sleeping mat, you can build one in minutes. A cheap foam mat works wonders. Layers of cardboard stacked thick can save your life. A folded rug, a pile of towels, blankets arranged beneath instead of above, even old clothing stacked to create pockets of air. All of them follow the same logic. Outdoors, dry leaves or pine needles, nature's oldest mat, still do precisely what they did thousands of years ago. The rule is always the same. Create air pockets beneath your body, prevent the weight of your torso, hips and shoulders from collapsing your insulation. Place your moisture barrier above the insulating layer, not below it. Keep your mat dry. Keep your core lifted, and never forget that the earth is always colder, heavier, and more patient than you are. These ideas may sound simple, but simplicity has always been the foundation of survival. The most crucial tools in human history are not the ones that gleam under store lights or come wrapped in premium packaging. They are the ones that obey the laws of physics, quietly, faithfully, without asking for attention. They sit unnoticed until the moment you need them most, and that is the final truth of this story. A sleeping mat does not look heroic. It does not carry the prestige of a high-tech sleeping bag or the visual drama of a heavy winter coat. Yet in the darkest, coldest moments, it is the silent tool that stands between you and the Earth's relentless hunger for heat. Because when everything else fails, when the fire goes out, when the wind becomes unbearable, and when the world falls quiet under a blanket of ice, that thin barrier beneath your body may be the only thing that lets you rise again with the morning light. The Earth does not care about your gear, but if you understand it, it might let you live.